Okay, good morning. So I started a couple minutes early here so Heather can verify that we are live. So Heather, when I get your text saying we are live, you're free to go. So producer Heather is monitoring from afar because she's got places to be and things to do today. So I am unsupervised here in the Monmouth Studios, and I've got my plant samples. I went out late yesterday, last evening actually, and pulled these plants, and I just left them in my truck all overnight. And it's so damn humid out, as you all know. They still look pretty fresh. So usually when you pick samples the night before a training, they don't look this good the next day. But that's one benefit of the oppressive humidity that we've been dealing with here lately. And I told somebody it was you knew it was a hot day yesterday when at 8:30 last night, and it had cooled all the way down to like 86. It was starting to feel a little bit comfortable. But anyway, good morning. Thanks for joining here on Ask the Agronomist. We are starting a little early, so there'll probably be some people that join in progress. But I got a long list of things on the board behind me there, and my big fat head is covering up the last thing on the list, which is corn pollination, which is the only thing anybody seems to be able to talk about for the last 10 days or so. And I did bring in some examples of tassels that I would like to talk about, and lots of disease samples. I was in quite a bit of corn yesterday. Not a great day to be in cornfields yesterday, as you know, but lot of things going on out there. Most corn is pretty far along, if not done pollinating. Whether it did a good job pollinating or not, we'll talk about that here towards the end of the program. But the pollination window has passed for a lot of acres of corn. Acres that are pollinating now, hitting things a little bit wrong as far as this heat that we're having. But we almost everybody, as far as I know, picked up some measurable rainfall over the weekend. Now, the dry parts of the state are still the dry parts of the state because the people who've been getting more rain all summer continue to get more rain every time it rains, and we've got small pockets where the rainfall has been excessive to the point where it's probably being a detriment to yields in some fields. We've got some small pockets where it's been, borderline droughty, and they've been getting rain just in the nick of time. And there's a large part of Tazewell County that finally picked up an inch plus last week that had been on the short end of the stick in virtually every rainfall event for the past month or so. And hopefully they'll get more through that area here yet today and tomorrow and the next day. Because as dry as they were, an inch and 2 or 3/10 is not going to last them, through grain fill. So as good as things look, I like to remind people that we're still, on a lot of acres, we're still 30 to 45 days from black layer, and there is a lot of yield yet to be determined. We're going to talk about the impact of hot nights. We're going to talk about yield components. We're going to talk about what can still influence yield. And I have a bit of a fear that either due to unrealistically high expectations, hot nights, disease issues, pollination issues, whatever kind of issue you want to imagine, it's going to be a real challenge for this crop to live up to the expectations that people have created in their mind for it, because it could not look better. I mean, this is just field after field after field, a big, lush, I emphasize big. If you haven't been out in corn, you might not realize how tall it is. But this was a vastly different growing season than what we've had the previous 3 years. And so we've got some big plants out there that are going to need to stand long enough to get to harvest. We've already seen a fair amount of root lodging and wind events. That reminds me, I need to add corn rootworm to my list, as well as other insects. So, anyway, lots of big, beautiful corn. Beans are looking very nice as well. Weed control in soybeans is a bit of a pleasant surprise for me so far. It won't look as good in 3 weeks as it does now, but there's a lot of fields that you can still drive by and not really see any weeds, which is nice. Now they're there. And one of these days they'll come up above the crop, and my challenge to you will be to leave them there when you see them, because we don't need to be spraying any herbicides from here on out through the rest of the season. We've got a lot of fungicide applications have been made. Corn's mostly done. Soybeans, been a lot of acres of beans done. People have commented to me that they're not seeing a tremendous amount of disease pressure in soybeans, which is kind of normal for us from a foliar standpoint. Our biggest diseases in soybeans are soil-borne diseases, not fungal diseases. We don't tend to get a lot of frog eye and things such as that. Haven't heard too many reports of white mold. It's been plenty wet for white mold, but it's been a little too hot probably for white mold's liking. So it doesn't really feel like a year that would be a bad white mold year. But anyway, soybean fungicide applications are probably more about plant health and getting the insecticide on than they are about controlling any specific disease. Corn's a little different because we've got lots of diseases that are very easy to find in corn, and one that gets talked about a lot. Our good buddy tar spot here, and I picked this leaf as an illustration of, if you can see well enough here, there's a region on this leaf right here that is, I don't know how many tar spot lesions there are per square inch right there, but it's probably 20. And that region of that leaf, extends for several inches on the leaf. And you might see that there's some chlorotic areas where that leaf is starting to lose its green color in and around where those tar spot lesions are. Sorry, I was holding that leaf in the wrong place. So this leaf is nearing what I would call the tipping point with tar spot, when it goes from, black dots on a green leaf to black dots on a leaf that's dying to black dots on a leaf that's dead. Now this leaf is down low in the canopy. This is below the ear. So this is not disaster here, but this is the level that we're starting to see on the lower leaves in some fields. And that's going to get a lot worse over the next 30 days. So we are not by any stretch of the imagination out of the woods on tar spot. I thought it would be worse than it is by now, to be honest with you, but it is progressing. I don't know if it's the hot weather that has slowed it down, and a disease that loves hot weather has been ramping up rapidly, and that would be southern rust. So those are some very early infected lesions of southern rust. You don't see a lot of pustules there yet. That's coming. I was in some fields yesterday that you can just kind of tell in another 2 or 3 weeks you're going to be orange when you walk out of those fields. So we're definitely, I think, in the process of developing a lot of southern rust pressure. And I would say southern rust is probably second on my list as far as foliar diseases in corn, right after tar spot, for having the ability to impact yield. It, like tar spot, is polycyclical. It can continue to infect all through the season as long as growing conditions are right. And the growing conditions we've had this year have been perfect for southern rust development. It loves heat. It loves humidity. And that's exactly what we've given it. Now, a disease that I'm frankly a little bit surprised is as easy to find as it is, because it's another one that's known for liking cooler weather. That's a pretty impressive northern corn leaf blight lesion there. The big cigar-shaped lesions. There really isn't The only thing that can kind of get mistaken for northern is sometimes Goss's wilt can look like northern, especially when you've got big northern lesions like that. I had a leaf here somewhere that was impressive for the number. Yeah, so this leaf has got 3 different northern corn leaf blight, maybe 4 different northern corn leaf blight lesions on it, and it's got some perfect. So right there is a good illustration of gray leaf spot here. Notice the very straight edges, and then northern here, more irregular edges, and northern corn leaf blight lesions. That's a smallish northern lesion. They get a lot bigger than that. So the size difference between, and that would be another gray leaf spot lesion right there next to it. So been a lot of talk about gray leaf spot. Gray leaf spot's very easy to find. Northern is very easy to find. Southern rust is getting very easy to find. Tar spot is, if you're not looking close, you can still miss it because it's down low. Most of the plant looks pretty good. The other disease that we talked about 2 weeks ago that continues to be really easy to find is physoderma. And that's what physoderma looks like on the midrib of a leaf. You can see these black dots on the stalk. They're not really on the stalk, they're on the leaf sheath. So it's actually a leaf disease. You see those black dots look like they're on the stalk, but if you peel back that leaf sheath, you'll find out they're just on the leaf. They're not actually on the stalk. But what I was trying to illustrate with this one, it doesn't show up the best here in the lighting in the room. You'll get these banded regions across the leaf where the leaf actually gets chlorotic. Let's see if this other one looks a little better. These are starting to kind of wither up a little bit. But when you get those bands across the leaf, and the reason you see the bands and the reason the black dots on the leaf sheath, kind of like a barber pole, curly Q up the stalk, is because this infection happens when you've got water down in the whorl when that plant was young and small. Maybe V6, maybe V7, V8, V9, somewhere in that, I'm going to say less than knee high up to thigh or waist high is probably when physoderma is infecting the plant. And because it infects in the water that's down in the whorl, when that whorl comes out and that leaf emerges and it unfurls, you get bands across the leaf. And sometimes it's a very striking amount of banding on there. That's physoderma brown spot or leaf spot. Generally is more of a cosmetic issue than a yield impacting issue, but when it gets really bad, and this year it does seem to be pretty bad, at least on my side of the state, it probably does have the potential in some cases to impact yield. Not on the level that tar spot and southern rust do, but it's not doing the plant any favors. So hopefully you've got your corn fungicide on. If you haven't, there's still a benefit to doing it, although I would say you've missed the sweet spot. And if you've been one of those guys that likes to scout and wait till you can find some disease because you're trying to extend your residual control late in the season, I don't like that approach. And I would tell you that you're kind of too late because there's a lot of disease that's already going to impact your crop. So if you kind of drug your feet this year, waiting a little longer, thinking that was going to help you, hopefully you've got those applications made. If you're still dragging your feet, waiting for the disease to get bad enough to spray, it's already bad enough to spray. It's been bad enough to spray for a couple of weeks. You just haven't noticed that. And so, I would be sure that if you're planning on making a fungicide application in corn, get that application on. So far, it's not looking like the likelihood of needing to make more late rescue applications is going to be necessary. But we can't really say that for sure yet. There's still time for things to get bad enough. If your first application was like a late vegetative pre-tassel application, you're definitely going to need a second application on that because that early application is not going to protect your plant season long. If you waited until tassel or R1, use a good product at a good rate, I think there's a good chance that you can be done with that application, but we're going to need to keep an eye on things for at least another 3 weeks, maybe another 4 weeks to get close enough to black layer that we can confidently say, okay, yeah, we're done spraying fungicide on corn for the 2025 growing season. So, as a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I don't have producer help today, but I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat here. And if you have questions, please put them in. But let's talk a little bit about yield expectations, yield components. Let's talk about the impact of hot nights. It's been talked about for years that hot nights are very stressful for the crops, and that's because photosynthesis occurs in the day. Photosynthesis, creates sugars and things that the plant uses to create yield and keep itself alive and growing and healthy. And then at night, it uses up some of those, sugars that it produced through the day, going through a process called respiration. And if the plant can rest at night and it can respire at a slower rate, that means it doesn't burn up as much of the photosynthetes that it produced during the day as it does when it's hot at night. And the magic number is about 70 degrees. Now, 50 is better than 60, and 60 is better than 70, and 70 is better than 80. But as those nighttime temperatures increase, that just means that plant is burning up more of the previous day's photosynthetic activity getting through the night. And see, Merle, where it goes. So Merle's question: in 1 week, we go from very hot weather to much cooler weather. What will that do to the corn plant diseases? So good question, Merle. Merle's been looking ahead at the 10-day, as have I, seeing some days with highs in the 70s. That sounds nice. Nights in the low 50s. That would be a nice reprieve from what we've gone through here recently. So that's going to do several things. That's going to slow down grain fill, which is good. We can't get back what we're going to lose, here through this week, but we can lose more if those kind of conditions continue. So a long, cool, slow grain fill period is what maximizes kernel weight and kernel size. The faster you get from pollination to black layer, the less your corn is going to yield. The longer it takes to get from pollination to black layer, all other things being equal, the more your corn is going to yield. So that's why parts of the country, there's places that raise some surprisingly good corn. Washington State, Colorado, places that have, they're rarely above 90 during the day, and they get down into the 50s, most nights. So perfect growing conditions for corn would be 80, mid to upper 80s during the day with lots of humidity. And then you drop the bottom out, and this will never happen, because where you've got lots of humidity, you don't get cool nights. The humidity, is what keeps the heat and keeps us from cooling off at night. And that's why it gets really cold at night in the desert. No humidity. So it's impossible for us to have the perfect conditions, because the perfect conditions would be humid as heck during the day and then dry, cool air at night. But if you could script it to where you're getting up to, 80, mid to upper 80s during the day, lots of sunshine, lots of humidity, plenty of soil moisture, and then you let that temperature get down to 50, 55, 60 degrees at night, that's perfect grain fill weather. So the other thing that temperature changes do is they change which diseases are favored. So right now, I'll get one of my southern rust plants back out. So right now, we're favoring the development of that southern rust. Every little speck you see on that leaf, even just the ones that are just chlorotic, those are southern rust infections that are not producing. There's really not rust spores there yet. There's not a lot of orange stuff you could rub off on that, but that's virtually all southern rust that's getting ready to smoke part of that leaf. right now, these weather conditions, perfect for southern rust. So when it cools off, the southern rust is going to slow down. Now it's already here. It's not going to go away. It will probably continue to increase. It will just increase at a slower rate because, like many things, diseases, they can develop under a wide range of conditions. They might have a narrow range of conditions that are their favorite. But if you get outside that range, it doesn't mean they go away. It just means they don't spread quite as fast and maybe they don't develop quite as bad. Now, our good buddy tar spot, it's been struggling through this heat just like I have been, waiting for cool weather. So the cool down is going to enable the tar spot to spread faster. And there's enough tar spot infection out here already that, we're never going to have a year, I don't think, again, and until we, if we breed in some really strong broad resistance and corn becomes immune to tar spot, yeah, maybe we'll have a harvest where we're not looking at a bunch of tar spot on corn leaves. But I think by harvest, we're always going to have a lot of tar spot on our corn plants. It's just a matter of, did it get there 2 days before black layer, or 2 weeks before black layer, or a month before black layer, or this year 2 months before black layer? When did it get started? How much time did you give it to get bad? So northern cornleaf blight is a cool weather disease. Tar spot is a cool weather disease, and southern rust is a warm weather disease. So those three diseases, gray leaf spot's kind of a hot weather disease as well. So basically, we've got two cool weather diseases: tar spot, northern cornleaf blight. White mold is a cold weather disease. So if there's any white mold, lurking around out there in soybean fields, some 50-degree nights is really good for white mold development. So basically, you would just see a little bit of a shift in which diseases are enjoying life the most if we take some of this heat out. See a question from Tom. Would the leaves you brought in have had fungicide applications? That's a great question, Tom. I stole these leaves from my landlord's cornfields just down the road from my house last night, and I didn't see them being sprayed, but that doesn't mean that they weren't, and I'm guessing they probably were. The leaves that I took all these samples from were below the ear leaf, and even if they were treated, coverage is a little sketchy down that low on the plant, and you would have needed to have treated pretty timely to have stopped this, because these infections got started a long time ago. So a lot of times, by the time guys spray, the lower part of the canopy is already infected, and so those lesions are going to continue to develop whether you spray or not. Now, the part of the plant that's important in these fields I was in looks beautiful. I mean, there's not a hint of it. Well, except for the northern. The northern, you find that all over on the plant. That gets started pretty early too. So these northern lesions were probably infected before that crop got sprayed, if in fact it was sprayed. And I should have called him and asked him that, because I knew that question would come up. But I don't know the answer, Tom, to whether that field was treated with fungicide, and if it was, I wouldn't have any idea how it was treated or what it was treated with. So I'm a little bit handicapped there. So I'm not saying that. I did have a conversation with Rachel Willis, who actually is a pathologist. I just pretend to be one. And she had a concern that, and again, it kind of goes back to expectations. People just spent a lot of money on some really good fungicide programs to prevent disease. They're not going to do that. They lessen disease. They help you manage disease. They help you protect your plant. They increase your yield. They do lots of good things. They're not going to prevent disease. There's still going to be disease there. And no matter how much disease is there, you just kind of got to have faith that there would have been even more disease there had you not used the fungicide. But there's probably going to be some fields that got sprayed that end up with enough disease in them that somebody's going to be thinking, oh, did they forget to do this field? Because you don't really, unless you can find a part of the field that didn't get sprayed, you don't really have a check there. You don't know what the field would look like if it hadn't been sprayed. And I think we're going to have enough disease pressure between. I mean, we got there's more gray leaf spot than we've had in years. There's more northern than we've had in years. There's more southern rust than we've had in years. And I think you're here very soon, there's going to be more tar spot than we've had in years. So we've got 4 pretty aggressive foliar diseases working on corn. So even if you used a full rate of a really good product at the perfect timing, you're still going to have disease in your corn. So we need to have the proper perspective of, what's the fungicide capable of doing. You could spray fungicide every 2 weeks all summer long and still have disease in your corn. There's always going to be something there. We're just trying to keep the plant, healthy enough that we reach close to full yield potential. Preventing the disease is not a realistic expectation or goal. So got a little long-winded there on Tom's question, but thanks for the question. So back to back to yield. So there's some people doing yield checks already. I get a little pissy with people that do yield checks this early. I mean, if you want to check pollination, that's probably a good idea. Been a lot of talk about that here about the past 10 days. You're probably all wishing, I'm a little bit holding that to the end just to keep you here, to be quite honest with you. Because I figure if I started off talking about tassel wrap, you'd all be gone in 10 minutes when we got done talking about tassel wrap. And I'm tired of people talking about tassel wrap, and some of my competitors are even more tired of people talking about tassel wrap. I guarantee you. But anyway, so the yield that's out there, is your kernel set is pretty well done. Your ear set was done a long time ago. So yield components are kernels per acre, which kernels per acre is ears times how many kernels on the ear. And then you've got your factor of how many kernels is it going to take to make 56 pounds of grain. And that's the big unknown at this point. And that's really what hot nights impact. So hot nights have the potential to do two things: cause more kernel abortion on the ear. So if you've got a perfectly pollinated ear, no problems. It looks beautiful. I was looking at some. I was looking at some yesterday. Let's see, where'd this picture go? Here we go. So that's an impressive ear there. That's a 20 around by 40 plus perfectly pollinated ear of DeKalb 6835. So that gets people excited. When I cut this, I cut the husks off that ear. So if you want to check your pollination, take a pocket knife, slit the husks, and carefully peel the husk off so that you're not ripping the silks off. Because if you just shuck it like an ear of sweet corn, you're going to tear the silks off. And if you want to evaluate pollination, you got to carefully get the husks off, and then just tap that ear. And I tapped that ear, and all but like 3 silks fell off of it. There wasn't even anything left on the tip. I mean, that is a fully pollinated ear that, sorry to say, is going to tip back. You're not going to hold all those kernels. Now here's where pollination issues maybe don't impact things as much as some people are afraid they're going to. It depends. You know how we agronomists love saying it depends. Let's say 20% of the kernels on your ear did not pollinate. That looks kind of bad. Let's say that ear I just showed you, 20% of the ear tips back. You're in the same spot. So depending on how much stress we have, depending on growing conditions, depending on how many kernels that ear can raise, will determine how much less than perfect pollination hurts your yield. So you don't have to have perfect pollination to, maximize your yield if you don't have growing conditions that would support that many kernels anyway. So I've seen some ears that are only half pollinated. There's going to be yield loss there. But if you're only missing 10 or 15% of your kernels, that's about the amount of normal tip back that happens on a normal ear of corn in a normal year. And you're not going to have as much tip back. If you've got poor pollination, you might not have any tip back. And, it doesn't, if you got 570 kernels on an ear, it doesn't really matter where they are. 570 is 570. You can have 570 at the butt with a bunch of tip back. You can have a blanks at the butt and, good middle and end. I mean, if you've got just scattered shotgun pollination, you're not going to have 570 kernels on an ear. But, it doesn't necessarily matter how well the kernel or the ear pollinated. What matters is how many kernels are there and how many kernels can that plant raise. And if it can't, until R3, which is the roasting ear stage, so that ear I just showed you would have been in the blister stage. You could see the kernels there, but it wasn't anywhere near ready to eat as sweet corn. So when you get to that roasting ear stage, those kernels, that's R3, you can't abort kernels after that. So that plant is stuck with what it's got. And that's why hot nights and stressful nights after R3 take so much of the toll on the plant, because that's when cannibalization is really getting ramped up. Because right now, if that plant's struggling and doesn't feel good, it sacrifices its young to survive. Once it gets to R3, it can't sacrifice its young anymore. It's stuck with them. It's got to feed them. And if the only way it can do that is cannibalizing itself, that's what it's going to do. So, what hot nights are going to do as far as the stress on this plant right now is going to cause tip back. So if 2 or 3 weeks from now you're looking at ears going, boy, I never missed a rain. I had plenty of moisture. I was never dry. Why is this thing so tip back? Well, it's because of these hot nights. Now, if you're dry on top of hot nights, that just adds insult to injury. And you can read, if you go online, you can find all kinds of numbers. There's kind of a range of, about 2.5 to 4.5-ish% of yield loss per degree above normal. So not above 70, but above normal. And that's like for the month of July and August. And I've even seen some estimates of like per night above 70, how much you're losing. You can probably find a whole bunch of data to do a whole bunch of calculations that will not be right. So I wouldn't waste your time doing that, because it depends on the hybrid. It depends on the soil moisture conditions. It depends on the soil type. It depends on your management. It depends on how much rain you had. It depends on so many things. I wouldn't waste my time calculating, okay, how many percent am I losing, per degree per night over 70? You can find information that will enable you to calculate that, but it's not worth your time to dig into it that deep. Just realize that, when we don't get below 70 degrees at night, that is a stressful night. And 72 is more stressful than 70. And 74 is more stressful than 72, and 76 is awful. So those plants are going to be having some hard nights, and what that's going to do now is it's going to cause some tip back, and it's going to cause that plant to be going faster through grain fill, which is going to result in a shallower, smaller, lighter, not necessarily lighter test weight, but lighter kernel weight kernel. That's going to take more of them to make 56 pounds of grain. So that's how this, kind of gets into the yield equation, because, the standard formula uses 90,000 kernels to make a bushel. It almost never takes 90,000 kernels to make 56 pounds with today's hybrids. Sometimes you can do it with 55,000 kernels. Often you can do it with less than 70,000 kernels. Almost always the right factor is probably somewhere between 80 and 85 on the average, modern corn hybrid. So using 90,000 as your factor is almost always conservative, unless your crop dies early. If your crop dies early from tar spot or crown rot, or, whatever kills your crop prematurely, then you've got kernels that are so small, so light, it might take 100,000 of them to make a bushel. And that factor varying from 50 something to 100, from 50 to 100 changes your yield 100%. So if you've got the same number of kernels and it takes 50,000 of them to make 56 pounds of corn, and that made your corn yield 300, if it takes 100,000 of them to make 56 pounds of corn, your yield's now 150. So it's a direct correlation to yield on how many kernels does it take to make a bushel. So some of these pollination issues that some people are seeing, it's going to make it really hard to count kernels on an ear. I mean, normally it's pretty straightforward math. How many rows? How long? Some of these ears that people are seeing, you damn near have to count every single kernel to know what was there. I would probably not try to do that, but you're going to have to make some estimate there. But again, I'm not a big yield check guy because a really good yield checker will get within 20 bushel plus or minus, and I don't know how helpful that is. And the combine will tell us. We can't change it. If you want to get really detailed with your grain marketing, yes, maybe you need to have some idea what's out there. So some yield checks to have some idea. Is this a great crop? Is this an average crop? Is this a really good crop? Is this what is it? But I'm not a big fan of doing a lot of pre-harvest yield checks just to brag about how close I got, because normally what happens to me is I'm embarrassed by how far away or how far off I was at guessing the yield. But that's just me. So hopefully these hot nights don't persist, all through grain fill. One hot night's bad. A week of hot nights is a lot worse. A summer of hot nights is a disaster. So we're going to string together several hot nights in a row here. It's at a stage of growth that most ears are still immature enough that kernel abortion can occur. And if your pollination got a little wonky, normally we see tip back on the tip, because if pollination occurs as God intended it to, the ear pollinates at the butt first and then works its way to the tip. And the ear will abort the youngest kernels first. Well, when you have pollination issues, your youngest kernel could be anywhere on the ear. So it won't maybe be tip back. It'll be kernel abortion scattered all over the whole ear, which will have a lot different look to it than what you're used to seeing. And that's not anything to be alarmed about, because it's last on, first off is how it works with kernels. So if you're the last kernel on the ear of corn to get pollinated, you're getting aborted every time. If you're the first kernel on an ear to get pollinated, you're never getting aborted. And then it so on and so forth. So you could see some tip back on ears that looks a little weird, because you could have kernels at the butt that abort. You could have kernels in the middle that abort. You could have kernels on the tip that abort. You could have all three. If you have kernels at the tip, the middle, and the butt that are all the same age, you could see kernel abortion everywhere on that ear. It might look like the whole ear is dying on you because it's got dead kernels scattered all over it. That's just because of the way that it pollinated. So don't be terribly alarmed if you see that. But this crop still has a lot of potential. Is it going to achieve full potential? No, but it never does. And the other thing I'll say about hot nights too is I don't know how many people that I've heard say, "I think my corn might make 300 bushel." Oh, good grief. That's a pretty high expectation to put on a field of corn. I hope it does, and it can, but I don't think we should be starting to expect that. And I made this analogy yesterday to a guy. Let's say your corn was going to make 220. It's better than that, but let's just say your corn was going to make 220, and you go through some hot nights. You might lose 10 bushel. Let's say your corn was going to make 300. And you go through some hot nights. You might lose 30 or 40 bushel. It's a lot easier to lose bushels starting at 300 than it is at 210. Because, if you've got the potential to yield 300, it's a lot easier to chip away at that potential than if your potential is only at 210. And if you put enough stress on that 300 bushel crop, you can turn it into 210. And you could end up at the same point as a crop that had lower yield potential to begin with, because it's not going to lose the yield as fast. Now we still want to try to increase yield potential. We still want to try to raise the highest yield we can, but that word potential is important. Crop's not in the bin yet, and until it's reached black layer and gotten harvested and gotten in the bin, we don't know what's going to yield. And so I guess just be, it's okay to be excited, and it does look amazing, and it could be amazing. The weather we're having right now is not conducive to amazing, but that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. It's just going to be less amazing. And, if we continue to get, we continue to need rain for another month. If we start missing rains and turn off dry in late July and August, that's going to hurt some as well. So I guess I'm always reminded of the old saying, don't count your chickens before they hatch. And there's a lot of people counting eggs right now and thinking they're chickens. So just be a little careful with that. Let's see what else I got on my list. Hot nights, yield components, crop progress, disease, fungicides, taps around. So, okay, let's touch on insects real quick, and then we'll get to pollination. So I've had several reports. Northern Illinois got a lot of rootworm pressure again this year, which that's nothing new. That's just normal for Northern Illinois. But we have had people in Mercer County, Knox County, south of Interstate 80, with fields of second and third year corn that have enough rootworm pressure in them that we're seeing quite a bit of feeding. We're seeing a lot of adult beetles. We're emerging. We're seeing a lot of leaf feeding. We're seeing silk clipping. If you dig and wash roots, there's rateable levels of injury, and we haven't really been seeing that in Central Illinois. So the trend over several years from our beetle trap surveys is that rootworm populations are increasing. That trend is continuing. It has increased to the point where most fields of second and third year corn have enough rootworm pressure in them that they probably need to be a VT4 Pro or a SmartStax Pro or some higher level rootworm protection product. We're transitioning out of SmartStax. When you talk to your dealers and you talk to your local reps, we're not going to be talking about a lot of SmartStax hybrids this fall, to plant in 26. We've kept one 10-10, and that's a hell of a 110-day SmartStax hybrid. Northern Illinois really wishes we had a SmartStax Pro version of it. They love the hybrid, but they can't sell it because SmartStax isn't good enough in Northern Illinois anymore. It's got to be SmartStax Pro or VT4 Pro, preferably in Northern Illinois SmartStax Pro. So I guess be vigilant on rootworm. Not saying you need to go back to rootworm corn on rotated acres. We are not so far seeing any indication that we've got pressure on first year corn, but as the pressure builds, the likelihood of us getting pressure on first year corn again is going to go up as well. Eastern Illinois is probably going to have an issue before Western Illinois does. Northern Illinois is always going to have a bigger issue than Southern Illinois. We're a little bit protected here in West Central Illinois because we're far enough south. We're out of the heavy pressure of Northern Illinois. The variant was always worse on the east side of the state. I cover Hancock County. Hancock County never actually documented that I'm aware of a field of first year corn with rootworm pressure in Hancock County, even 10, 15 years ago when we were living with bad rootworm. You guys that are more towards Bloomington, you know what bad first year rootworm looks like. Parts of far western Illinois never really observed that, nor did southern Illinois. So as you go south and west in the state, the rootworm pressure has always declined. That's just normal, and really that trend, that pattern, has not changed. You can have heavy rootworm pressure anywhere, but your odds of having heavy rootworm pressure in Illinois get better as you go north and as you go east. But rootworm populations are higher this year. I've had a lot of reports of guys scouting fields of soybeans to spray fungicide on that they're telling me, well, I didn't see that much disease. Beans look pretty healthy, but man, there's a lot of insects out there. So it's it's a pretty good, insect year. Might be one of those years where you get, if you're using a good insecticide like our leverage product, there might be more yield benefit from the insecticide than there is from the fungicide in soybeans. We have had a few guys been dealing with aphids again this year in corn. Nothing like last year. I'm not sure there was anything that needed sprayed this year for aphids. There were a few fields that got sprayed for aphids just because, guys, what they went through last year, and they were not going to set back and take any chance that was going to happen again. So we were a lot more proactive this year, maybe too proactive in some cases, treating for aphids. But I was out in one of the hybrids that was kind of one of the poster children for aphids last year. I was out in it in 2 different fields yesterday, and I didn't see a single aphid anywhere in those fields. So the pressure hasn't been as high on the western side of the state as it's been central and east. We've seen that in previous years as well. So I don't know if that's something to be consistent, or it's just that we've had a little more water over here, and they do tend to be favored by drier conditions. And so that could be why East Central Illinois has a little heavier pressure this year. But again, nothing on the level of even close to what we saw last year. So I think what we're seeing this year is kind of what I would call a normal, ignorable level of aphids, but we're not ignoring it because we're a little paranoid about aphids right now. And when somebody finds some aphids, it's pretty likely that they think they ought to do something about that. If you saw aphids steal 60 or 80 bushels of yield from you last year, which did happen in some cases. Okay. Let's get to the elephant in the room. So I got these tassels from the same field. There's 2 different hybrids here. You can see this one's a different hybrid than this one. 2 different fields. These tassels came from the same field that I took the leaf samples from. Pollination's fine in this field. I've found a few ears that weren't perfect, but I've found a lot of tassels that weren't very perfect. This would be one. So those are the same hybrid. So there is a lot of variation in tassels normally. I think there's even more variation in tassels this year than normal. So something impacted tassel development this year, and that happened probably V5, V6, V7, small corn, long time ago. If you've got a tassel with no branches, that's not normal. And this tassel's got no branches because when it developed at about V5, V6, V7, for some reason, it didn't develop normally. And you can find a lot of what I call underdeveloped tassels. That's not much of a tassel there. If you miss the nick on that a little bit, you might not have great pollination, even if it wasn't wrapped up. So I'm not saying tassel wrap is not a thing, because it is. But there's a lot of tassels out there with no branches. That's not normal. Nobody has developed a hybrid that has a tassel with no branches. So if you've got tassels with no branches, if you've got puny, runny little tassels, that I'm seeing a lot of that. And that is a factor in the pollination issue that people are seeing that I think is not getting talked about because everybody's talking about tassel wrap. And there have been instances where the flag leaf and other leaves up there at the top of the plant kind of didn't unfurl, didn't unwrap, didn't kind of let that tassel express itself the way that it wanted to. I've taken pictures in fields where the flag leaf is pretty tight around the tassel, and the only part of the tassel that's sticking out of the leaf is about 2 inches of the tip of this single spike. I think if you've got tassels that don't have branches, it's easier for the leaves to stay wrapped around the tassel. because there's no branches there in the way. And I don't think we should have tassels that look like this. And if we've developed hybrids that have tassels that look like this, we're asking for trouble because there's just not as much pollen being produced on some of these plants. And if things go awry, so let's say you shed pollen for 2 days before you have silks. And if you didn't have 2 extra days worth of pollen, you may end up a little short. So the tassel wrap phenomenon, it's being compared to rapid growth syndrome a lot. I have a few issues with that because the plant's not growing rapidly right before tassel. It's almost fully grown. It's basically done growing at that point in time. So to say that it's rapidly growing, I don't know. I guess it is rapidly developing, but it's not really growing a lot because it's full size. But there's certainly hormonal things that control leaf development and tassel emergence and leaf unfurling, and no doubt there was some sort of hormonal imbalance in that crop due to the weather, due to a stress, due to the environment, due to I'm not sure we know what that kept those leaves wrapped up tighter at the top, and it does that's what rapid growth syndrome is. It's the leaves stay wrapped up when the plant's in the whorl stage, and then it grows over like a shepherd's crook because it can't unwrap. And you don't see that with this tassel time leaf wrapping because the plant's not growing anymore. It's there. It just the one last thing that was supposed to happen, the leaves were supposed to open up, didn't for whatever weird reason. And I would also say that and you've seen this, there are some hybrids that hide their tassel really well because they've got a big prominent flag leaf, and even that second leaf is right up there with the tassel. And the tassel's not like a star on a Christmas tree where it's way up at the top above everything else. It's just kind of in and amongst the leaves at the top of the plant. We've got plants with very upright leaf structure. That's a result of modern plant breeding going after yield. We bring out what's yielding the best. And sometimes we inadvertently select for some characteristics that aren't ideal. If you've got plants that's got a bunch of leaves in the way of the tassel at the top, and you have pollination problems, it's probably bad. Normally, doesn't make any difference. And pollination is always a highly inefficient process. I mean, you only got to get 700 or 800 kernels pollinated on an ear, and every plant is going to make hundreds of thousands of grains of pollen, except for that one's not. But if you've got plants with normal tassels and there's no male sterility and that plant is fertile, you're going to produce thousands of times more pollen than it takes to get the job done. So pollination doesn't have to be efficient, doesn't have to be perfect, because we can be kind of sloppy with it because we got way more pollen than it takes to get the job done. But you got to have pollen and silks at the same time. And when you don't have pollen and silks at the same time, we call that missing the nick. And that means that the plant's a little out of sync. That's normal too. It's almost uncommon for the tassel to start shedding pollen right as the silks emerge. That's perfect. What's more common these days is you'll have silks for 2 or 3 days before you have pollen. That's a good thing. What's a bad thing is having pollen for 2 or 3 days before you have silks, because that's pollen that gets wasted. The silks can continue to grow, and as long as the silk is green, and as long as the silk is alive, and as long as the pollen can get to the silk, you can still pollinate that silk. So if your silks are out early, they'll wait for the pollen. Now, the only bad thing that happens there is they get long sometimes. And when silks get really long and when there's no pollen out there, right when those silks emerge and they start to grow down, sometimes the silks underneath, like these guys down here, the pollen can't get to them because the pollen's landing up here and it can't get down to these silks here. And what you'll end up with is the silks that come out first are from the butt of the ear, and the silks that end up covered up are on the away from the stalk side of the ear at the butt. So if you're looking at a lot of ears that are blank at the away from the stalk side of the butt at the bottom of the ear, that's because you had long silks. That's because you had silks before you had pollen, and some of those silks got covered up, and these guys down here couldn't ever catch a grain of pollen. There was nothing wrong with the silk. There was nothing wrong with the pollen. We had plenty of pollen to get the job done. We just needed it a couple days sooner so that it was falling on those silks when they were sticking up as they were coming out, not after they get covered up. So that's how you know that we were a little out of sync, and we had silks before we had pollen, and those silks got long before they got pollinated, and some of them got covered up, and you just couldn't get pollen on them. That's way better than shedding pollen for 3 or 4 days before you have any silks. So let's say a plant's got 5 good days of pollen shed. I'm just picking a number out of the air. It's probably longer than that. But if you've got 5 good days of pollen shed in you, and the first 4 days there's no silks there, that's how some disasters in the past and drought years happened, like in 83 and 87 and 88 and 89, where you had fields of corn that were basically zero yield. It's because the plant shed all of its pollen before there were any silks there. And selecting for drought tolerance, as every corn breeder has done forever, has actually pushed silking up. Drought tolerant hybrids, silk earlier, silk faster, silk more more reliably than hybrids that don't have as much drought tolerance. And so selecting for earlier silking is a good way to get drought resistance, because if you've got a hybrid that can get by with less water, but it silks late, it might not matter that it could get by with less water, because it's not going to have any corn on it, because it's going to shed all the pollen. And then 2 weeks later, the silks are going to come out, and you're going to raise a lot of really impressive looking bare cobs when that happens. And so keeping that plant in sync, hitting the nick, as we call it. If you've been around seed production, keeping the male and female in sync with each other is critical. That's why they do their planting date splits. That's why they flame males. That's why they or females or whatever gets flamed. It's, they're trying to control. I want to make sure we got pollen and silks at the same time so that we do a good job getting that ear fertilized. So I think we got a lot of stuff going on. There are interesting hybrid differences. There are interesting trait differences within hybrids, which that's even more fascinating to me. And how widespread it is really unknown at this point. I've heard people talking about planting dates. I've seen fields outside the planting date range that I've heard people talking about that have issues. So I don't know that it's restricted to hybrid. I don't know that it's restricted to planting date. I don't know what impact management had on it. Did we do something in these fields when they were V6, V7 that is resulting in something now? Was it a stretch of really hot weather in June at the wrong time that caused something to happen? But the things that happened to these plants that impacted tassel development, that was a long time ago. That tassel has been developed in that plant. It knew how many branches it was going to have. It knew how big it was going to be. It knew everything about what the tassel was going to be. Probably when the corn plant was about that tall. So if something interfered with that happened a long time ago. So, I think, my recommendations are, walk your fields, see, the fields I was in yesterday, beautiful, and I've heard stories from people that, they've heard they've got a bad hybrid. They go look at theirs like, well, it was fine, and that doesn't mean that it's not bad someplace else. It just means that the environment that's causing it to have a problem, didn't exist in your field. Or maybe you've got a different trait version of it, and the other trait version is worse. And so you hear, oh, hybrid XYZ. Well, it was actually a certain version of hybrid XYZ that had a problem, and you've got a different version of it. I have not identified a single DeKalb hybrid yet that I think is having a problem. Are there fields that are less than perfect? Yes, and that's kind of normal. But pollination on our stuff that I've been in looks pretty good. I'm not going to throw any stones or name any names, but there are hybrids in the industry that are struggling with this issue. I don't know if it's 5% of the fields of those hybrids or 50% of the fields of those hybrids. I know it's not 100% of the fields of those hybrids. I've seen the same hybrid in two different locations produce this tassel and a tassel that looks like that. That's not normal, but the environmental factors and stresses that influence tassel development, that was a long time ago. So if you want to talk about tassel wrap, that's fine. But if you've got tassels with no branches and tassels that are 10% the size they should be, that's not because of tassel wrap. That's because of something that happened, earlier in the growing season. Tom's got another question. Using more, I can't remember, curls corn, anything to do with tassel wrap. So Tom's question was, is there, dicamba has the ability to wrap corn up. Group 15 herbicides like, Dual and Frontier and Harness have the ability to wrap corn up too. Comes out wrapped up onion leaf type corn. So is there any correlation between, dicamba and tassel wrap? It would be pure speculation to think that. I see no correlation between dicamba sensitive hybrids and tassel wrap. I see no correlation between plants that had rapid growth early that are showing tassel wrap now. I think it's completely plant hormonally controlled, influenced by environment, influenced by genetics. If it was related to a herbicide issue, there should be correlation to certain hybrids that maybe have a sensitivity to that herbicide. So I'll use I'll pick on one of my own hybrids. So DeKalb 11041. DeKalb 11041 is sensitive to growth regulator herbicides, and it exhibits rapid growth syndrome severely. I had lots of complaints on 11041. It came up beautiful. It was growing awesome. It was the prettiest corn on most farms it was on until it wrapped up and bent over. And then 2 weeks later, when it unwrapped, had all these yellow leaves sticking up out in the field. We're not seeing tassel wrap in that hybrid. We're not seeing pollination issues in that hybrid, but we saw a lot of rapid growth syndrome in that hybrid, and it's sensitive to dicamba. So just using that as an example, I don't see the connection, Tom, there. Not saying that there isn't one. I just don't see it. And anybody who claims there is just, dogpiling on dicamba, which everybody seems to love to do these days. But I don't think, some of the stuff that's been put out there, I've seen situations where people have a picture of a rapid growth syndrome plant, like a waist high corn plant that's all twisted up. And then right next to it's a picture of a poorly pollinated ear. I think that's kind of journalistic malpractice, because that directly, connects the two things to each other in people's minds. And I don't think that's true. Those plants that had rapid growth syndrome, they unwrapped, within a week or so, like they always do. They grew normally for weeks. And then we get into this tassel wrap conversation. And I think in some people's minds, they're almost thinking of it like that plant. Oh yeah, it got wrapped up early and never got unwrapped and the tassel couldn't come out. No, that's not what happened. All of the plants that had, rapid growth syndrome, I shouldn't say all, there's probably a few of them out there that are still a gnarled up, twisted up mess because they never did get unwrapped. That does happen very, very, very rarely. But these plants that went through rapid growth, that showed a lot of rapid growth, those are not the same plants that are showing tassel wrap. And it could be a similar phenomenon, but I don't think there's a direct correlation between the two. Because if there was a direct correlation between the two, I would expect there to be the hybrids that showed a lot more rapid growth are the same ones that are showing tassel wrap, and that is not the case. Because, like I say, I'm not aware of any hybrid on the market that showed more rapid growth than my beloved DKC 11041, and we haven't seen any tassel wrap in that hybrid, and there are a couple of our hybrids, that I've heard competitors claim, oh yeah, I've seen it in DeKalb such and such and such and such. Those hybrids didn't show, a lot of rapid growth early in the season. I haven't seen the problems in those hybrids that the competitors are talking about, but everybody that's dealing with this issue is doing their best to make it sound like this is an industry-wide corn issue, not a specific germplasm issue, and it's not a specific brand issue, because germplasm goes across brands. So there's more than one brand that's being impacted by this situation, but there is one primary germplasm supplier that's being impacted by this situation more than most, it seems. So a lot to be learned yet. I'm not saying that there isn't things going on out there that go beyond genetics and it's environmentally influenced, because there is nothing that happens to a plant growing in a field that is not an interaction between the genetics and the environment. You can blame the genetics or you can blame the environment, but you need both of them working together to produce the problem. And if you remove the environment, it doesn't happen. If you change the genetics, might not happen. But you put the right genetics in the right environment, that you're gonna see something. And like I say, the difference that I've seen between trait versions of hybrids that are impacted, that's one of those things that kind of makes you go, And trait conversions of hybrids are often a little different than the base hybrid was, and we've dealt with that since traits have been around. And we're learning some things this year that people maybe didn't know. The other thing I would point out too, and I don't think people really think about this, you may not see this problem at all in a plot, in a strip trial. You may not see this problem at all if you've got corn split planted, like half and half in a planter. You definitely will never catch a pollination issue in a breeder trial. Because when you got 2,000 hybrids in a field and little small plots and there's corn pollen all over the place, the plants all, you could cut the tassels off of half the hybrids in that field and they'd pollinate fine. So if a hybrid has a propensity to have an issue because of tassel development or something wrong with its tassel, it would be hard to catch that in a breeding program, because you'd have to rely on your notes about flowering, because if you're just selecting them off yield, the yield's going to be fine. It'll get pollinated from somewhere. But when you get that hybrid out in the real world and you got an 80-acre field of it or 160-acre field of it, and there's nothing else out there, and it's got to do its own thing, that's when things start to be noticed. And a lot of people that are saying, oh, my stuff's fine, they're looking at their stuff in plots, and plots isn't where you got to look for this. And even if you're, like I say, if you split plant everything you plant, if you love to plant two hybrids at the same time, half and half in the planter, one of them struggling and the other one's not, the one that's struggling isn't going to have a problem, because it's probably going to get pollinated from the other hybrid. And this is, and this is a good, I was talking to Dr. Belo about this a couple of days ago, and he said, this is a good reason why you shouldn't plant, one hybrid in a field. You ought to split plant everything. I'm not a big fan of split planting stuff, because it makes things harder to manage. But I guarantee you there's some fields out there that have a hybrid in them, that if it would have been just that hybrid in the field, there would have been a problem. And there's not going to be a problem because it was split planter planted, and the hybrid next to it got it pollinated. So there's a lot of, a lot of angst, a lot of talk, a lot of chatter, a lot of concern. I think in a lot of cases it's probably being overblown, and it's not going to end up being, as bad as the coffee shop talk made it sound. But I do think there are some situations out there where, yeah, a hybrid might make 240 when it could have made 280 because it didn't pollinate the best. And 240 is not a disaster, but somebody's going to wonder where their other 40 bushel is, because back to that, our expectations are super, super, super high. And if you think your corn's going to make 300, you might live with 280, but you're going to be pretty pissed about 240. And, maybe it was never going to make 300 in the first place. But we have very, very, very lofty expectations for how good this corn crop's going to be. And that scares me, because I just know how many things can happen between now and harvest that just keep chipping away. And yeah, maybe it could have made 300, but it's probably not going to. Now, it might. Hope it does. We had corn last year making 300. And last year's corn that made 300 last year probably never looked as good as this year's corn did that might make 260. So you just can't, you can't judge it off of looks. It's all about kernel count. It's all about kernel weight. And if you've got a lot of big, heavy kernels, you're going to raise lots of bushels. If you've got lots of average size kernels, you're going to raise a good crop, but it's not going to be a bin buster. And if you've got freakishly huge kernels, but not enough of them, yeah, you might have a respectable crop, but it's not going to be a bin buster. So you got to put that all together. We got to keep the plant healthy. We got to keep the plant well watered. We got to try to avoid these nights where it's, only gets out of the 80s for about 3 hours in the middle of the night. And if we can keep the plant healthy, keep the nights cool, keep the plant well watered, do a reasonable job pollinating kernels on the ear, that's what's gonna maximize the potential. So anyway, I appreciate your questions today. Appreciate your attendance. Had a good conversation. And one more thing. Almost forgot most important thing. So top of my list. So 2 weeks from today, August 7th, that's our next episode. I'm gonna have a lot of fun that day. I always have fun on Ask the Agronomist, but the next episode is going to be a fun one. So I was talking to Dr. Belo a couple weeks ago, and he was reminding me about his upcoming field day. So the crop physiology field day, Dr. Belo's field day at U of I, is August 7th. That happens to conflict with the next episode of Ask the Agronomist. And Dr. Belo was very kind to me. He jokingly said, he says, shoot, we didn't know when we picked the date we were creating a conflict with Ask the Agronomist. Not that Ask the Agronomist is as important as Dr. Belo's field day, but it made me feel good. So anyway, I'm going to his field day, and so I ran something past him. I said, how about we do Ask the Agronomist a little early that morning so that we're done in time for the field day. Since I need to be there anyway, would you and some of your students like to be on the program with me? And he was gracious enough to say yes. So in 2 weeks, the August 7th episode, we will start at 7. So we're going to start a half an hour earlier than normal. We will start at 7. I'll be live from the U of I Research Farm there in Champaign. And I will have Dr. Belo as well as about 3 of his students, not all at the same time. I'm not going to make them all set on my lap here so I can get them all on screen. But I'll be with Dr. Belo first. And if he and I take up all the time, his students are going to kind of get shafted a little bit. But his goal is for he and I to spend some time together, and then the students will rotate in. And I'm going to have a blast. I'm looking forward to that. Please come to the field day if you can on August 7th. It'll be really good. I think it starts at 8:30. Registration starts at 8. I think the talks actually start at 8:30, and that's why we're moving Ask the Agronomist up 30 minutes so we can be done in time for that. And I will have Dr. Belo as well as 2 or 3 of his students on with me for that, and then we can all go enjoy the field day, and hopefully it's not as hot as it's going to be today or it was yesterday. So anyway, thanks for your time, thanks for your questions, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks live from Champaign with Dr. Belo. So take care.